Hi, welcome to Starz Recapped. Today, I'm going to explain an American science fiction romance movie titled Passengers, which was released in 2016. Spoiler alert. Watch out and stay sharp. The interstellar spacecraft Avalon is seen traveling through space, en route to a colonized planet called Homestead 2. All of its quarters are empty, and the vessel is operating on autopilot. The 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers are in hibernation. Suddenly, the ship enters an asteroid belt, which begins to weaken its shields. Power is redirected to the main shield, but the Avalon is on a collision course with a massive asteroid. The asteroid slams into the ship, triggering several malfunctions. As the ship initiates self-repair protocols, one of the hibernation pods unexpectedly activates. The passenger who wakes up is Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. His pod opens and an automated system assists with his awakening, informing him that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years, and that the ship is now just 4 months away from reaching Homestead 2. He's told that he can spend the remaining time enjoying the ship's luxurious amenities. Jim receives instructions regarding his ID band, his cabin, and the main activities he's expected to participate in before arrival. Eager, yet uneasy about meeting the others on board, he gets ready, leaves his cabin, and walks into an automated classroom designed for an entire group of learners. Jim appears a bit anxious as a hologram begins explaining Earth's situation, describing it as overcrowded, overpriced, and overrated. The hologram asks him to save his questions for the end of the lesson, but Jim repeatedly asks why he's the only one there. Realizing the hologram can't answer him, Jim sets off to look for other people. Jim makes his way to the ship's main concourse. It's empty too, but an automated information desk offers assistance. He asks to speak to a real person, and the system directs him to a steward, but when he arrives, there's still no one there. Frustrated, he requests to see the captain. When Jim reaches the bridge, he doesn't have clearance to enter, but he can see through the glass that none of the command crew is awake either. Eventually, Jim visits the observatory and makes a startling discovery. The ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2. Realizing he's woken up way too early, Jim rushes back to the concourse and sends a message to Earth, asking for help. He doesn't know how to get back into hibernation. The communication system informs him that the message will take 55 years to reach Earth, and another 55 years to get a reply. Jim is devastated. He wanders the ship and eventually stumbles across the bar, where he finally sees another person. But as he talks to the bartender, he starts to notice something odd. When the bartender goes to get him a drink, Jim realizes he's an android. His name is Arthur. Jim tries to get more information from Arthur, but he can't even explain to the android how it's possible that he woke up so early. The next day, Jim wakes up in his cabin and heads to the cafeteria, only to discover that most of the food options are reserved for gold-class passengers. He settles for a plain coffee and starts thinking about how to fix his hibernation pod. After gathering the necessary tools, he manages to get the pod functioning again and lies down inside it. Nothing happens. He then attempts to access the crew's hibernation chambers using the tools he found. That doesn't work either. Minor system glitches start occurring throughout the ship. Jim keeps returning to the bar, not just to drink, but to talk to Arthur. Arthur offers him some advice that convinces Jim to break into a gold-class cabin and enjoy some of the ship's luxuries. Jim tries out the fine dining, the games, the entertainment system. But as time goes on, the loneliness eats away at him. One day, drunk and despondent, Jim wanders near the hibernation pods and stumbles upon an airlock containing spacesuits for spacewalks. He puts one on, heads to the airlock, pulls a lever, and hits the button to open the outer door. Once outside the ship, he's overwhelmed by the view. He's the only conscious human being in that moment, floating in the vastness of space. Jim releases the magnets on his boots and drifts freely, consumed by sorrow. He eventually returns inside, removes the suit, and then walks back to the airlock without it. He pulls the lever, ready to end it all, until he changes his mind at the last second, stumbles back inside, and slips on a bottle. As he gets up, his attention is immediately drawn to a woman in one of the hibernation pods. Her name is Aurora. Jim searches for her records in the ship's database and watches her passenger interview. He's captivated by her. Later, Jim is seen sitting beside Aurora's pod, still listening to her interview recordings. Back at the bar, he reads some of her writing and discusses it with Arthur, the android bartender. Jim becomes consumed by the cruel irony of his situation, traveling to another planet for a better life, waking up too early, never making it there, and discovering the perfect woman, only for her to be completely out of reach. Thoughts of Aurora won't leave his mind, and eventually he starts entertaining the idea of waking her up. He talks it over with Arthur, but the android can't grasp the ethical dilemma. If Jim wakes her for his own sake, he'd be condemning her to the same fate, stranded aboard a ship with no way to survive the journey. At first, Jim decides against it, but as time passes, he can't shake the idea. Until one day, he gives in. He goes to Aurora's pod and manages to activate it. As she begins the same awakening process he went through, Jim hides and quietly slips back to his cabin. Later, he heads to the main concourse, hoping to run into her, and there she is, just as disoriented and confused as he was over a year ago. Jim tells her they're the only ones awake and brings her to the observatory. There, he explains that he has no access to the crew or the main ship controls. Aurora panics and insists on getting back into her pod. When they reach it, Jim explains that there's no special equipment on the ship to reverse the process, that once awakened, there's no way to return to hibernation. They return to the concourse, and Jim suggests she get some rest since she's just come out of suspended animation. Aurora expresses sympathy for him, realizing he's been alone on the ship for over a year. Jim heads back to the bar, overcome with guilt about what he's done. He asks Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one who woke her up. The next day, Aurora wakes and returns to the concourse. She questions the automated information desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her, and the two head off to get breakfast. As they leave, the info desk malfunctions briefly. At the cafeteria, Aurora realizes Jim has been eating the same basic meal for over a year. She surprises him by ordering something from the gold class menu. They talk about the possibility of fixing the hibernation pods, but unlike Jim, Aurora refuses to give up. She searches the infirmary, digs through research files, and eventually finds herself at the sealed doors to the crew's hibernation quarters, trying to force them open. Jim begins to notice more malfunctions occurring throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora reflects on her life aboard the Avalon. She spends her days writing, jogging through the empty corridors, and swimming in the pool, becoming increasingly aware of the isolation and the reality of her situation. At one point, she heads to the cafeteria to interview Jim, thinking his story might be worth telling. She asks why he chose to immigrate to the colony. At first, Jim responds with generic company slogans, but then he opens up, explaining that he hoped to start over on a new world, to build a life where he could truly become someone. Later, the two find themselves in the observatory, and Aurora finally reveals her own reasons for being there. Unlike most passengers, Aurora has a round-trip ticket. Her plan was to spend a year on Homestead 2, then return to Earth and write the most incredible story ever told, becoming the first journalist to make the journey there and back. As time passes, Aurora begins to lose hope of finding a solution to their situation, and Jim comes up with a plan to lift her spirits. He takes her dancing, then to the movie theater, and even to the basketball court. Finally, he brings her to the bar to introduce her to Arthur. She relaxes for a while and lets herself enjoy the moment, until the reality of their circumstances comes flooding back. Jim is left at the bar with Arthur, burdened by guilt over what he's done. Soon after, he's seen working on something in secret. Later, Aurora walks into the observatory to find a miniature replica of the Chrysler building that Jim made for her. Not long after that, the two go on a proper date at the bar. They enjoy dinner and open up to each other. Aurora shares that her father passed away when she was a teenager. After dinner, Jim takes her to the airlock, and they both suit up for a spacewalk. For the first time, Jim has someone to share the breathtaking experience with. He switches off the magnets on their boots, and together they float freely in the vastness of space. When they return inside, they kiss passionately, go back to his cabin, and spend the night together. Soon after, they begin living as a couple. Aurora moves into Jim's cabin, and she continues to write about their life aboard the ship. They run together, eat together, sleep together. Jim continues to explore the ship and eventually discovers the hydroponics bay. He picks some flowers and brings them to Aurora. One day, the Avalon passes near a red giant star, and they head to the observatory to watch the incredible sight together. That night, they celebrate Aurora's birthday at one of the ship's many restaurants and later at the bar. While Aurora stays at the bar, chatting with Arthur, Jim slips away to the restroom to prepare a ring he made for her. As they talk, Arthur casually mentions that Jim was the one who woke Aurora up, unaware that it was still supposed to be a secret. Moments later, Jim returns to the bar and Aurora confronts him, stunned and horrified. She runs off in a panic, furious and heartbroken. When Jim returns to his cabin, he finds that all of Aurora's belongings are gone. The next day, he runs into her at the cafeteria, but as soon as he speaks, she bolts. Aurora is devastated. One night, she storms into Jim's cabin, physically attacking him in a rage, punching and kicking him, overcome with grief and anger. She continues to avoid him, so Jim resorts to speaking to her over the ship's comm system, trying to explain himself and apologize. He tells her he fell in love with her, but Aurora isn't moved. She can't forgive him for stealing her life from her. Then, one night, while Jim is alone in his cabin, another malfunction occurs. A critical error hits the ship's systems, causing the main command functions to shut down. Later, Jim steps into the elevator, which suddenly malfunctions. Elsewhere, Aurora walks through the main concourse and notices that Jim has planted a tree there. She heads to the cafeteria next, where she sees that the food dispenser is also glitching. Suddenly, both she and Jim hear a voice over the ship's comms. It's the deck chief, asking who planted the tree. They rush to the concourse and find Gus Mancuso standing in front of the tree. They introduce themselves and quickly fill him in on everything that's happened. Mancuso is baffled that 3 hibernation pods failed. He takes them to the bridge and confirms that the ship is experiencing serious issues. But to find the cause, all the system data has to be checked manually. As they leave the bridge, a service robot nearly crashes down on them. They tell Mancuso that malfunctions have been occurring more and more frequently throughout the ship. He's concerned and begins showing them how to gather the necessary diagnostic data. Later, at the hibernation pods, Mancuso inspects the system while Jim joins him. Jim explains what he did to wake Aurora. The deck chief is appalled by the revelation. Later, as Mancuso is reviewing the collected data on the bridge, Aurora joins him. They talk about her pod and what happened. He tells her he understands the pain it's caused, but that he can't undo it. Jim walks in carrying the 16th broken robot. Mancuso starts feeling the effects of hibernation sickness and decides to rest, but as he leaves, he coughs up blood. That night, Aurora can't sleep, so she goes for a swim. Suddenly, gravity fails throughout the ship, and she begins to drown as the water in the pool floats around her. The gravity system resets just in time, and she barely makes it out alive. They run into each other as they both head to find Mancuso. The 3 of them gather on the bridge, slowly piecing together what's been going wrong with the ship. Mancuso figures out that 2 years ago, something critical failed, taking out a major system. They need to find and fix the source of the failure, because the rest of the ship is struggling to compensate. If they don't fix it, the entire vessel will be stranded. They set out to track down the problem, but Mancuso suddenly faints, so Jim and Aurora rush him to the infirmary. He's dying, and there's no treatment that can save him or even prolong his life. Sometime later, the 3 meet again in the observatory. Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet, tells them to fix the ship, and then dies. Suddenly, the lights shift to a warning red, and the ship starts shaking violently. Jim tells Aurora he needs her help, and they sprint toward engineering. But there's another failure in the gravity system. Then another failure hits Arthur as well. Jim is forced to deactivate the android. They finally reach engineering and start looking for the source of the problem. They find it in the power plant, but as they open the hatch, Aurora is sucked into space. The asteroid collision caused a breach in the hull there. Jim grabs onto the hatch to avoid being sucked out, but eventually he's pulled in as well. Together, they manage to seal the breach. Right after fixing that, Jim realizes there's more than one hull breach. They follow the meteor's trajectory and discover that it hit the reactor control computer. Jim thinks he can find replacement parts. They locate and install the part, but the reactor venting process still fails. They try to vent it manually, but it fails again. Jim figures out that the vent door has to be opened from outside the ship to cool the reactor. They both head to the airlock, and before he goes out, Jim gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet, just in case he doesn't come back. She helps him suit up and tells him to come back because she can't live on the ship without him. Aurora returns to the reactor room, where the temperature is reaching critical levels. A bolt from the reactor strikes her arm just as Jim reaches the vent door outside. Inside, the temperature keeps rising as Jim tries to bypass the vent door controls. He realizes he'll have to manually hold the door open to vent the reactor and tells Aurora. She's worried about the plan, but Jim insists, telling her to vent the reactor. They argue. She doesn't want him to risk his life, but he explains they have to save the others. She vents the reactor, and the process succeeds. But the vent's fumes push Jim away and break his tether. The pressure in his suit starts dropping fast. He tells Aurora what happened, and she rushes to grab another suit and bring him back in. As she suits up, Jim apologizes again. Aurora launches out to get him, but her tether doesn't reach far enough. She's yanked back until she manages to grab his tether and pull him in. Aurora drags Jim to the infirmary, only to find that he's already dead. Using Mancuso's ID bracelet, she overrides the medical protocols and initiates resuscitation. The medical pod kicks into action and brings Jim back to life. Aurora forgives him. Later, she repairs Arthur, and together they give Mancuso a proper space burial. Jim takes her to the infirmary and tells her he's figured out a way to reprogram the medical pod to work as a hibernation chamber. He tells her to get in and sleep through the rest of the journey, but as it's revealed later, she decides not to. She chooses to stay awake and live her life with him on the ship. Jim proposes, and they spend the rest of their lives together aboard the Avalon. 88 years later, the Avalon finally arrives at Homestead 2. The crew wakes up and finds the ship in a completely unexpected state. Aurora has left a message behind telling the story of the life she and Jim lived while the rest of the passengers were asleep. That's my explanation of the movie Passengers. So, guys, what do you think of the movie? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel. Thanks for watching.